Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Key Components of an Elite Hazardous Waste Management Program. We're glad you could join us. My name is James, I run webinars and events here at Triumvirate Environmental, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before I turn things over to our speaker, I just want to run through some housekeeping items to let you know what you can expect. You may have noticed when you signed on that your microphone is muted. We ask that if you have any questions or technical issues during the webinar, to use the questions box to communicate those, and I'll be able to address them. Following the presentation, there will be an open Q&A period. You can ask questions anytime during the webinar by typing them into the same questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. In the event we don't get to all of the questions, we'll make sure to respond to those in the coming days. Finally, there will be a recording and slides available. We'll be sending those to you tomorrow morning. And there's also going to be an offer announced at the end of the webinar, so be sure to stick around for that. Our speaker today is Mike Albert. Mike has over 9 years of experience in the EH&S industry and here at Triumvirate. He's developed a comprehensive view within industry niches, having overseen Triumvirate's on-site support services program in New England. With a focus on on-site service work and an understanding of operational efficiencies, Mike has carved out some best practices to share with others, and that's what he's here to do today. With that, I'll turn things over to you, Mike.
Thank you, James, for that. So with this, we've carved out a bunch of looks into our not only on-site services program, but EH&S programs in your world. We're really looking at elite programs. We're looking at above average compliance programs. We strive to be higher than everybody else, and I know that's what everybody's on the phone as well looking at. So what you're looking in front of you is our agenda. We want to go through life cycle of hazardous material, compliance, always want to keep those doors open. That's what keeps us paid all the time and keeps these industries open. The safety and security procedures, practices, processes, we're going to go through a bunch of that as well. And then sustainability and the proactivity around sustainability at the end as well. Sustainability has been a very hot topic recently, and we're going to go through a view on that as well. So with that, I'm going to take our first look into the life cycle of our hazardous materials. The biggest thing around this is that it's delivered on your site because of the needs of the research, the needs of the patient, the needs of the production. Depending on your industry, you're going to receive this type of material on your site, usually at a loading dock, into a storage room, or directly onto the floors. So therefore, we got to be really cautious about what's coming in. Chemical inventory is very important. I'm sure many of you have thought about it in the past of getting an inventory system set up, but knowing what's in the rooms, knowing what's coming in is vital to the entire procedure that's out there. Knowing where it is and knowing what it is. You don't want any and all types of chemicals on your site and or hazardous materials at all. So you want to be able to have some kind of checklist, some kind of board knowing what's there and what's going on. You want to keep the hazardous materials safe and segregated. As many of us know, you don't want to put a lot of chemicals together or it's going to form that reaction that we don't want. So therefore, we have to teach our staff and especially our receiving areas how to segregate what's going on and the process around it. Then, once it ends up in the lab, we got to make sure that that staff is trained and understood as well. So there's a couple steps in the process, but just getting it in and knowing what's there is very vital to the process. Secondarily, using it, having these mixtures up in the labs. Many of us has always gone up into labs just being like, I wonder what that mixture is made out of, and then having to ask the question and then getting the, oh, they're not here right now, I don't know what it is. So we always got to be cautious about what they're making up, there. So therefore, the researchers, the production line specialists, the patient care professionals, environmental services, facilities, so on and so forth, we got to keep them safe. We got to know what they're using it for and what they're making mixtures out of. You know, keeping the chemicals secure in the process. You don't want to go up to a lab and see spills all over the floor or sloppy, quote-unquote, really wet chemistry going on in the labs or in the patient care areas. And this goes a long way for the facilities department as well. Facilities departments uses a lot of different hazardous materials, including oils, gas, flammables, a lot of different materials that go into a safe, secure procedure that we got to know what's going on to make sure everything's labeled and make sure that the qualified people are actually using it. Who is using it and how they're using it are very important in this process. Sampling material for hazards, mixtures used with different chemical components, very, very good to know. And then knowing what hazards are there for safety and staff of others. Knowing who's around and if it's going to be in the public's hands or not is going to be important. We're going to go a little bit later into the safety and security of being able to keep these areas safe, but knowing it from the start is training that person or those people that are going to know how to keep it safe in the process of what's going there. Including, you got to make sure those SDSs are present. Make sure that the safety materials are there so someone can read up on it. They know what's going on and understand the rationale for why it's going there and why they're using it. Even if it's a small amount, it could pose a very, very serious health hazard, so we have to be cautious in the process. Then after it's used, as we know, it's got to go up for disposal. Many of the different types of hazardous materials obviously cannot go down the drain or into the normal trash, so we have to be able to label and segregate it. Know that it's separate. Know that it's quote-unquote special waste that we have to keep track of to get out of there. Very important to know what it is, and then ultimately how to package it and get it out, get it off the site. Many of us see the drums that are pictured in the slide right here. However, we lab pack, you'll lab pack, a lot of different ways of being able to dispose of different types of chemicals on site. Consolidation is a huge process where it can cause some safety concerns, but when it's done correctly, it can save you time, money, and also make sure that the real hazardous materials are segregated out of these processes to make sure that we can get the right drums off for shipment in the process. Storing for transport, vital to this entire procedure. We've seen a lot where you walk into a storage room and there's a leak. Storm came through, there's a leak, there's water on the floor, and luckily everything's in a secondary containment, but heaven forbid something was in there where it could be reactive to that dangerous when wet, that really bad chemical that's in there that can cause a moisture-sensitive reaction and cause an issue. So we got to make sure that our rooms are good, that the storage of the drums is good, and make sure that we're all safe in the process. And then lastly, the shipment to the end disposal. Hiring the right company to go do it, and it's not the mom and pop shops that are out there. We got to make sure that we're all secure, we're safe, the right permits are there, and everything is secure in the process with the proper documentation, of course, with all the manifests and profiles and land disposal bans, etc. So ask yourself a question. Are all hazardous disposal materials created equal? No. Everything's material dependent. There's always different options for what's going on out there and what's going on in the procedure to get it off your site as well for that process. There's a lot of specialty wastes out there between the DEA controlled substances, the high hazards, those picric acids that are in the back that could be so dry that could cause explosions. We have to be cautious of that. And then your APIs if you're in a pharmaceutical industry as well. So we have to be cautious in that entire process as well. So with that, we really walk through the process of when it gets on a site, where it goes, how it's handled, what it's used for, and then the disposal. The entire process here, this entire big process is really controlled by the who of who is qualified to do it. Think about who's in charge of it. Is it you who's listening right now? Is it part of your staff? Is it potentially an outside person coming in to help you with this process? Make sure we really think about the who and how it's getting done in the process. Next, we'd like to do a little poll question. So James can definitely help me out with this one. And the question comes around, do you feel confident that you have control over what hazardous materials enter your site on a day-to-day question? So therefore, we're really looking at the arrival, the segregation, the looking into what's actually going on out there. Think about the holistic approach of the big picture view of, do you even know what's on your site? Do you know where the high hazard chemicals are, where the low hazard chemicals are, where the big volume of chemicals are coming out of, and our hazardous material that's coming out of different spaces, and we have to be careful about it. Think about the processes that are involved with this. Do you have specific SOPs that are designed to make sure that people are following the right steps in the process? And we really got to understand that they're qualified to do it, understand what to do if there's an emergency, but also understand what to do when the normal things are occurring in the process and they happen to run up against a very small little kink in the venture that we're looking at out there.
All right, Mike, let's take a look at those results, see if there's any surprises. I'm going to close the poll now and push that out. So we've got 52% say sometimes I at least get contacted, 38% have full control, and only 10% say that they don't have any control at all.
Well, with those poll results, it's definitely much more reassuring that a very large group of people at least generally know what's going on their site. That's always a good thing to have. And then I commend the 38% of people that are listening in and watching that they have the full control of what's coming in and off their sites. That's really where these elite programs really come and really get to, where you can have that control over the on and off site and be able to control the volumes as well. Because not only are you controlling the hazardous materials, but you're controlling the safety around them as well. And then I look at the last 10%, and I just say, think about all these different ways that we're going to talk about today about achieving compliance, thinking about a different way of doing it through the safety and sustainability, and maybe there's a couple little things in here that you can take away to help with that gaining of that knowledge and of that material that's coming on from day-to-day basis. So with that, we're going to continue forward, look at our next agenda topic here, the compliance. You got to keep those doors open. We really got to make sure that we're getting paid, that our industries are staying open, and that's our job. So we got to help out with that wholeheartedly. We look at the regulations from a holistic, big picture view. I've listed a few here. These are the most common ones that we've seen in this type of hazardous material realm. From OSHA, from your safety and security, your EPA that came out with RCRA way back in the 70s, and then DOT, IATA, trying to dispose of it properly, get it off your site. DPH, Department of Public Health, comes into effect all the time. And then you're looking at Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. And then we always think above all else is your state-specific regulations. Not every state has state-specific regulations. However, the one that I'm calling in from right now in Massachusetts has some very strict state-specific regulations that we need to follow. And then so does our neighboring states between Connecticut and Rhode Island. They have some specific state regulations that are vital to follow, that are much more specific than the federal regulations that are out there that we have to watch out. So these are things that we have to understand, know, read. A lot of it is a lot of reading, a lot of technical jargon that we have to understand, but it's very common and very useful in your jobs every single day. So therefore, one of the biggest problems we run into is just understanding of these regulations and the skills to apply them. Yes, we all got these jobs for really good reasons, and we should be continually trying to educate ourselves more, understand more, knowing what's going on. But asking for help and asking for clarification is always a good thing. I, on a periodic basis, will talk with our state regulators and ask many questions about the interpretations and the changes that some of these regulations come out with. And the regulators are really good at giving good understanding, good explanation, and then occasionally they're just like, well, this is how we think it's going to play out, but we're not 100% sure yet. So those are the ones that we always have to be cautious of. But if you think above and beyond, you think to that next level, you're always going to hit on all cylinders and your sites are going to look really good. The regulations continually are changing. You know, some state regulations can be very strict. You know, as I mentioned, Massachusetts is one of them. However, The regulators around here are very nice and very comprehensive around explaining them, which is very, very helpful. And then you got to stay up to date. Staying up to date is a constant battle. I think every day I'll get somewhere between 10 to 20 emails just on regulation updates on something small, on some wordings, on some bigger picture ideas that have been made into law, into these regulations, and we just have to be watching it throughout this process. So managing it, you really got to manage it through the inspections and the assessments that are, some are required and some are not, but all of them are going to be able to help you bump your program up from average to elite to that above average added value program that you really want to have out there. Types of inspections that are very common within the industry, main accumulation areas, they got to be done weekly. It's one of those regulations that has to be followed. There's, from my knowledge, no other changes in any other state that made it any different, but they got to be done weekly. They have to be done. It's a requirement. Satellite accumulation areas, all the other areas throughout your facility that are not always required by state to do a formal inspection on them, but assessments are definitely really good to keep your program up to date, catch things before they happen, catch different mixtures before they would cause a problem. There's a popular one out there that is called a piranha etch solution that's used in etching glass that has a couple chemicals in there that oxidize and that also give off gas, and we have to be cautious of the fact that when they do, we have to be venting these bottles. We have to be aware that the researchers and the qualified members are understanding of the process and the materials and the hazards around it to make sure that these bottles don't explode. But that's just one case. Many other cases just go from normal housekeeping to making sure the signs, labels, segregation is all there so you can have that program that you want up and running. A lot of the other waste that we run into commonly that you'll see on your sites as well, your universal waste, your bulbs, your batteries, everything coming out of the light fixtures and whatnot, you have to be able to box up, label, and keep segregated completely. Biological, regulated medical waste, all becoming a very pivotal waste stream in the process as well. Some states have specific regulations around them. Some of them don't. It's good to know which ones do and which ones don't so you can follow them specifically. So if an inspector were to come in, you can monitor that as well. Radiological, all that radiation is becoming, from our knowledge, it's becoming less and less used over time. However, it's still out there. Sources are extraordinarily dangerous. We got to make sure the qualified personnel are there. Got to make sure the right licenses are up and used throughout the process. APIs, as I mentioned before, the active pharmaceutical ingredient is pivotal to the pharmaceutical industry, and keeping it safe, secure, and disposing of it properly is their #1 priority when it comes to disposals and managing programs like this. Lab audits. Consistently, you can make a lab audit anywhere from 2 pages to 10 pages to really talk about everything from penetrations in walls to the normal trash getting taken out. Are the researchers and the people in the labs and the patient care areas doing their job and keeping things safe, secure, monitoring it well, but then also keeping it organized in the process. These lab audits really give you a good view over time of how things look within a year-to-year standpoint. Contingency plan requirements, all those large quantity generators out there, you're going to make sure you're abiding by them. And if there are any changes, we make those changes as well. Life and chemical safety rounds are huge, and we really got to make sure that the general public is safe and secure, and your staff is safe and secure around these topics as well. So then achieving compliance. How do you tackle all this work? It is a lot of work in some cases. Internal, external, there's always help out there. Whether you can do it internally, which I think is phenomenal. I think there are a lot of smart people out there that understand these programs, know how to use these programs, but dial in, look at the regulations again, do research, understand, make their program that much better in the process, which is phenomenal. Many elite programs, like I mentioned, have help. There's specialized labor out there. There's organizational labor out there. It's a struggle to keep all those organization due to all these extra costs of keeping permits up to date, keeping licensing up to date, keeping all the training up to date within your staff as well. It's always a tough thing, but it's something that if you stay organized, you can stay on top of and achieve it as well. In many cases, this is usually not your normal job. Environmental health and safety might not be your number one job. It might be number two. This is something that we've run into many cases where there's startup companies or smaller places of businesses where they really need to do this and prioritize it much more than they do. But if not, ask for help. Definitely ask for help. But you have to have that dedicated time, labor, materials. State and federal regulators, they will shut your doors if you don't understand and follow the process and understand what's going on out there. So the ones that are really doing the job, it's great, makes it very important every day. Read, understand, change, improve, know the knowledge, understand, interpret. Interpreting regulations and understanding what it actually applies in your industry is a tough subject sometimes, but getting groups together really understand what's going on in the process. I ran into a case one time where it was a smaller industry where I walked in and I met with a internal member of the Environmental Health and Safety Department, and we walked through a main accumulation area. And when we walked through the main accumulation area where everything was being stored, I asked a very simple question of how do you label everything? How do you label all your containers? And what was being done was that there was a sign saying hazardous materials, and it had arrows down to all these containers, and there was no specific names, there was no understanding of what all the different waste was. It was all just different buckets with a sign up top. And we had a long conversation about interpretation of what actually labeling the containers versus labeling an area versus segregating. And it was just a great conversation to have because it was something that I noticed that reading was one thing, understanding was a different, and then interpreting was something completely different. So think about how these regulations actually interpret what's going on out there and understanding how it applies to your industry in general. The elite compliance, the above average compliance, the ones that we're really looking for, have a full understanding of environmental impacts of the industry. Each one of your industries will impact the environment slightly differently. From the main niches that we work in all the time between our pharmaceuticals, our education, our healthcare, and our industrial, they all have slightly different environmental impacts. And knowing what each impact is huge to correlate it to the regulation to make sure that you're being compliant with it. Complex knowledge of all the chemicals and non-chemical inventories that are out there. I commend that there's approximately 90% of the group on this webinar right now have a really good, if not full, understanding of what's there. That's phenomenal. That's a really good step in the process. Completed documentation of all these multifaceted and forward-facing programs is huge. It's all about the process. It's all about the who is in charge, who knows what to do, and how the approach is getting done. If there's a bump, there's a bend in the process, we got to make sure that we fix it and adjust it as well. The number one priority, got to understand what makes the complete program. Regulations and responsibility, understanding, interpreting, and then document control. Regulators are going to come in, they're going to say, show me your documents, show me your manifest, show me your permits, show me your licenses. This is what I want to see before I even walk around the facility. A lot of people have a hard time producing it in a very clean, cut format. If you can, I commend you solely for that. That is huge. But if not, you start going through the check marks of what's good and what's bad. Make sure that it's in hands reach, whether it's electronically or in a folder or somewhere where you can present it to these regulators as soon as they come in. And then continually think about the continued costs that it takes to keep these processes in motion, keep these programs updated with trainings, monitoring of air monitoring, groundwater monitoring, of your staff monitoring, make sure that they're safe in the process. And then ongoing maintenance. Ongoing maintenance, making sure these processes get reviewed, updated, changed as needed is a huge part of the process. Don't think because it's running perfectly or there's no comments about it, it's fine. Always review. Set them up on a good schedule for you to review if not already required by the law and the regulations. Next, we're going to go through safety and security procedures that we have here as well. What's really good about this is it talks a lot about OSHA. OSHA, we've done a bunch of webinars on as well. We have a really good few consultants who do OSHA very, very well. But from the holistic view, the big picture view, it's how to keep your people safe. It's what we have to follow every single day to make sure that when we're handling hazardous materials, it's the biggest factor that they're probably going to do in the process. People who work with it, work around it, moving it, storing it, understanding what they're doing with it is huge. We have to understand, train them well, make sure that they're qualified, and if they're not, get that training and awareness up to date as quick as possible. Consider all of the different security measures between locking everything up, hard to get access in certain areas. Are these hazardous materials out in the open to the general public potentially? I've run into several different institutions where I can literally walk from the front door all the way back into a back corridor, grab a few chemicals and walk out with no safety, security, and no one asking me a question. Didn't have a badge on, looked like the general public, just wondering if it could be done or not. It's fully planned, it's understood, but in the process, these are things that you have to think about. These are things you have to test and understand and look around. Keep those eyes open, keep those ears open, make sure you're listening and understanding what's going on. And then there's always an oops. Emergency response is a really big deal, especially in larger institutions, but it could be very troublesome in smaller institutions as well. Ask yourself a bunch of questions around handling spills. Are you the person to actually handle the spill? Where's the communication around it? Are you communicating? Are you the primary person to actually communicate this? Or do you have a staff member who does it? Is there staff member internally trained? Is this a call to the outside to get someone in like us to come and help? Getting a cohesive system set up is all about the process and the who. It's who to get trained, how to get them trained, and get that system written, documented, and followed as much as possible. The response that's needed, first and foremost, is all about your safety, making sure that the people around the spill and people around this emergency response are safe, but then secondarily, it's your staff who's going to actually respond to it. Going to make sure it's efficient. Try very hard not to make it bigger than it actually is. Make sure that it's accurate. Make sure that the scope is accurate, that you're telling the people the most accurate information about their safety, about your safety, and about the chemical safety around as well. And then make it consistent. Every single time an emergency response would happen, anytime a spill would happen, the consistency around your process needs to be the same so people know what to expect. If they don't know what to expect, there's usually more panic, there's more frustration, and there's more problems along the way. So we always have to be very, very careful with the consistency and efficiency around these programs and processes that are set up. And remember, that we're not doing a full training today on emergency response. There's a lot of different things that go into it, but just think about it from a holistic view of knowing what it is, what the chemical or hazardous material might be, and how to respond and keep your people safe. If you're having trouble thinking about who do I call, how do I do it, what's the procedure, that's something to really look into in this process as well. And then all the safety equipment. Setting up, maintaining is a huge process throughout the entire thing. Eye washes, safety showers, all fall under our ANSI standards to make sure that they're done, that they're inspected, that they're maintained, to make sure that they're actually being able to be used in this process. Fire extinguishers are the standard in every single one of our facilities and required. However, sometimes in new spaces they can be set up wrong, they can be set up in awkward positions, they might be set up in a temporary location that remains temporary, aka permanent, over the next 5 to 10 years, and a fire department inspector might come in, the fire chief or someone they dubbed to come in and look at it will find an issue. Or worst case scenario, something breaks out as a fire and it's not where it needs to be. So very important about maintaining and keeping a good process around your safety equipment. AEDs are becoming very popular. I've seen them in so many facilities now. This is something that is from my knowledge and from many of my colleagues' knowledge, is something to outsource, to monitor, to maintain, to switch out, to do inspections on. You yourself can definitely do an inspection on it, to check it, to do the basics around it, but with AEDs and the program and process around it, it's vital to make sure that you understand how to write it up, who's doing it, when to use it, when not to use it. AEDs can be very, very good and save people's lives, but in the other sense, if people are uneducated and unknowing of what they can actually do and how they work, it can cause a problem on the other side as well. Spill kits, chemical or biological, they should be everywhere within your facility, but you got to keep them monitored. You got to understand when they're used, when they're not used, when they should be swapped out. My biggest recommendation is not to technically buy an off-the-shelf spill kit. It's probably going to be way more expensive and not as needed as something that you can make personally for what you know from the hazardous materials around the site. So that really goes back to understanding what's on your site and understanding what types of spills you could potentially have, and get those spill kits ready for any type of emergency. Fire alarms goes on with fire extinguishers. Fire alarms are constantly tested, and they should be tested, and every single training in many of the facilities that I've been in, there's a humongous chunk on fire alarms and making sure they're not covered, and making sure that the EH&S staff can walk around, look around, and it's either they're either turned off appropriately by a permit, or they're not covered, and make sure that things are working in the specific order as well. And then lastly, there's specific alarms for hazardous materials control. There was one case where we responded to an ethylene oxide spill, where we walked into a facility where they said, all right, a blue alarm went off. We think it's ethylene oxide, but it's not going off anymore, so we have to treat it like it's ethylene oxide, and that's fine. Always treat it like the worst case scenario. However, what surprised me out of that just general gist of the situation before even handling the situation was that they didn't even know that they had an ethylene oxide alarm. Knowing if you have specific alarms or need specific alarms for those types of chemicals is very, very important to this entire process. Those are the ones that are going to keep your employees safe and also keep you safe in the process as well. So make sure you're checking with those high hazard chemicals and making sure that you know the alarms that are going off and or potentially going to go off in those areas. And then with the inspections and assessments that are out there, you need those inspections to monitor all your safety equipment. You got to make sure that it's up and running. You have to check them. Every safety equipment has a different time frame on inspections, how to do them, when to do them, should you outsource it, should you not. There's all these different regulations around it and things that we have to keep up with. There's programs in place to actually change out and fix systems. There's some companies out there that'll come in and just change them out on a periodic basis. We all know fire extinguishers have a certain lifetime expectancy to them. We got to make sure that we proactively get in there and change them out before anything goes wrong. The personnel who are trained to do it, some required, some might be licensed professionals, some might just be us going out and doing them, like you, walking around, making sure these inspections are being done, or having a staff member do it. That's perfectly fine as well. And then automated versus a manual program. Sometimes you have automated programs that they just come in, switch them out, call it a day, you're good. And then there's some manual programs in there that you actually monitor, and you actually say, all right, building 4, level 3 needs to be switched out in April, and then the next floor needs to be switched out the following week, and then you're really monitoring, understanding the program as well. But every program can be customized to fit your own needs. You can design your own program and process around it to make sure that you're meeting the regulation and understanding what's in there in the process as well. And then remind yourself that there's standards and there's regulations that are out there. Standards are what elite programs follow. They follow all the standards as possible. They follow all the regulations as possible. But many of the standards are like what a lot of people like to call best management practices. Many of the standards out there are hey, you need to do this on a certain time frame. Good, we're going to do that. We're going to have to flush the eye washes every single month. We're going to have to do our yearly inspection according to ANSI. But you know what? On top of that, I'm going to have my lab staff make sure that they flush those eye washes weekly, because I know in my town we have hard water, and that in the facility it actually builds up, and occasionally these eye washes actually get full of buildup and we have to clean them on a more often basis. That's going above and beyond. That's not taking the back step to the actual standard, but it's just making sure that you're going above and beyond the standard and following a regulation if needed in the process as well. So with that, safety and security, we have sustainability and being proactive. This is one of the more exciting topics that's out there. I think sustainability, green, recycling, all those terms that are coming out right now are something that we're all looking for, and always looking for something to really grasp onto and make our program that much better. Sustainability is huge. You're managing materials continually in a facility. There's not always just one way to solve the problem. You can solve the problem several different ways. Maybe you don't even know it's a problem yet. Maybe there's a material in a facility that you've been disposing of in your normal trash for years upon years upon years, and then suddenly you're like, oh, I found a different outlet because it's better, it's more sustainable, and oh, they might actually pay me for that material. That's interesting. So it's thinking differently. It's thinking and taking the next step in the process. You understand the usage in a facility. A lot of the higher volume hazardous materials or even material waste streams, you can monitor, understand, look for different outlets, look for more sustainable outfits, and take the next step to know where to really throw it, know where the next steps are, and then think differently about the process. Getting sophisticated around waste characterization and collection. Think more than just that container you get in the end of a process. Think upstream. That's why it's so important to know what's coming in, what they're using it for, and then how it comes out at the back end. Sustainability is all about the entire process. It's not just about the end disposal and, oh, I can send it off and get it reused for energy or recycled into a different material. It's more than that. Did you actually have to create that actual end disposal product? Did you have to use it in a certain way? Could it have been cut a little bit differently? Could it have been segregated a little bit differently in the process? Or because of ease of the laboratory or patient care setting or industry use, it was just easier to just do it one way, and ultimately the collection process is all in one versus several different ones, and potentially save you money and be more sustainable in the process. Think about innovation. Innovation and waste management, ideas around trends, around understanding what's going on out there. Things are constantly changing. I have a couple examples later of thinking differently about how to look at waste management differently, but continually think upstream, continually think what are the next steps moving forward and how to do it, when to do it, and then go through that process as well. Linking it back to all that management of the incoming material. When you have that person on that loading dock or in those receiving areas knowing what's coming in and you're helping to monitor that process, it's huge. Inventory, ordering systems with notifications. There's a lot of inventory systems out there that will notify environmental health and safety, that will notify specific people when specific chemicals are being ordered. You'll get a flag, you'll get an email saying, hey, XYZ, Joe Smith is trying to order 20 liters of potassium cyanide. I don't know why we need to do that, but let's go have a discussion, let's figure it out. Then you can have a discussion. Then you can go back to the lab staff and say, why do you need it? Can I understand why? Can I understand what you're going to use it for? And then come to find out that it was only a price change. They wanted to order more because it was cheaper, when ultimately it's just going to create an unsafe situation and ultimately probably a lot of unsafe waste as well. So it goes to that training of the staff. Train your staff to think differently about what's going on. Have them ask the right questions of the researchers and staff of the rest of the building and industry to understand what's going on out there. A full chemical inventory system. These programs out there, these elite programs, have stock rooms, have a specific amount of chemicals on their site and the hazardous materials on their site to actually understand, know, and then be able to use to their fullest ability. In these facilities, the biggest time that they clean out is only when they're moving. Like they got to move an entire stockroom. Yeah, they're going to clean out and purge all these chemicals. Otherwise, they can purge them on a pretty normal basis according to an expiration date, according to life expectancy, and so on and so forth, where they can manage the process. Monitoring, tracking for maintenance in facility stock areas, like I said, very, very good thing to monitor and understand in that process. Policies and requirements within the facility, this is up to you. This is something that you can really have a really big impact on, of understanding what's going on out there, setting up processes, setting up SOPs, and then getting the right people in to get the buy-in to follow them, to make sure that everybody's being safe, but also making sure that it's disposed of and collected properly. Ultimately, think differently. Partner with the purchasing department. Several larger institutions have big purchasing departments that everything goes through. They got to send in requests, they order them, they look for that cost difference, but they're more willing now to listen in and understand the safety, sustainability of something as well, so it helps with the process. Know the key planning and improvement staff. There are staff out there that look to constantly improve the facility by safety, by space, your project planning, engineers, so on and so forth. They will be the ones that you really got to get in the ear of, and you got to talk to them on their level and say, listen, I want to make it safer for my staff, so we have to change the layout of this room, or we have to add this room, and this is why it's going to help. Get involved, stay involved, keep your ears to the ground, know what's going on in the next step, know that they're going to add an addition, know that they're going to take down a building, know that departments and rooms and areas are going to go out and come back in, and tanks are going to be removed. Like, get involved as much as possible, and that's going to get you on the proactive side of being able to have an impact and a change in the procedure. It's all about smarter management. Like I was just talking about, we got to make sure that we are all smarter in the smarter management process of these materials. Less hazardous materials on site equals less disposal. Pretty simple right there. Less high hazard materials equals less disposal, but also increased safety. If you can monitor how much is coming on site and know what's coming on site, where it is, how long it's supposed to be there, it can keep not only your staff safe and secure, it can keep the general public, and you don't want to see the fire department there, so therefore it's helping everybody in the process. Separation of waste streams. Think paper recycling, but with hazardous materials. Think of that blue trash can, that recycling trash can that is next to you, that you're only supposed to put paper and potentially other recyclable materials in there. Now, if it goes into a single stream container, you mix in there plastics, you mix in there paper, you mix in anything that could potentially be recycled. But if you're thinking about it from, all right, I have 10 different materials that have to go into a process, can I separate the most hazardous ones out, the least hazardous ones out? Can I have some type of effluent or some type of disposal process where I can take out those high hazard chemicals and or materials to make sure that we can consolidate it better, that we could separate and create less hazardous waste, less high hazardous waste, making sure that that process is controlled and understood and safer for the entire process. Consolidation. Consolidation by far is one of the biggest ways to save on sustainability, because when you start finding out all the light chemicals, all the light hazardous materials, consolidating in the safe processes, the safe procedures, the safe qualified people, the who's doing it, is huge and can save you money, time, and also be sustainable in that process, because you could find that one of those different types of disposal waste streams could be sent out for a sustainable disposal solution instead of landfill, instead of just incineration. There are other ways out there. So therefore, material in the correct waste stream, ask people these questions, understand process behind what they're doing, how they're doing it, when things mix in, when they don't. Many waste streams can be separated to save money, time, and be sustainable in the process. We really got to understand what's going into these processes, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then understand if it's right or not. So really seek innovative reuse and recycling alternatives. I've seen several industries go out there and have single-use devices that usually go into a regulated medical waste container or a potentially recyclable container that goes somewhere. But ultimately, there's a lot of single-use devices out there that go to a collection service where they'll reuse, refurbish, redo, and engineer what they've used and take it back as a company. Look at these companies, understand what they're going to do and what they could offer you. They might offer you a little less time and a little bit more money to be able to do this and actually be much greener in the process. Biologicals, regulated medical waste, all of that. We have a really good process where you can treat, sort, and ultimately turn a bunch of it into plastic. It's called a red to green model. However, that's an innovative solution to a problem or a disposal method that was just really burning and dumping into a landfill. So thinking innovatively, thinking something outside the box, being able to treat a biological, tear parts of it off that are not plastic, be able to send those through recyclers and other different areas that will reuse some of that material, but then also just turning all the plastic into a lumber-based product to be able to use on the back end, to change the game of going everything into a landfill into something usable in the process. Old drums and containers. Empty, consolidate contents, and send for recycling. Many, many times I see old glass, old plastic going into many different types of dumpsters, and it's just wasting space and wasting material that could ultimately be used and reused in the process. So think about that. Think of how they can go on to a reusable form and also be changed in the process. And it doesn't matter if it's high volume or low volume. They both can yield a very high reward depending on what it is. Precious metals like platinum or gold or silver that are used in many processes, it doesn't matter that it might be a very small amount. They can be used and yielded a very high reward on the back end if segregated and used accordingly. So wrapping it all together, making sure that we understand what really makes an elite program, what makes that above average program, fully understanding the hazardous materials process, knowing from the dock in to the dock out process and knowing where it lives in your facilities. Compliance. Compliance is huge. We have to understand where we're going to be having these holes in our programs, get the processes, get the SOPs set up to understand holistically how we have to stay in touch with our entire program and make it fit together in a process. Safety. Above all else, keep yourself safe, keep your staff safe, keep the general public safe. Know that everybody in your facility is under a safety control and you're a very, very big piece of it. Keeping those safety equipments and systems up to date. Monitor them, check them, set up inspections, set up routine, consistent reviews to make sure that it's all there. Be proactive. Understand proactivity is better than reacting to every single problem out there. It just doesn't have to be with sustainability. It can be with any process that's out there, but you really want to be proactive to be able to help understand and change the game for what's going on. And then bottom line, you can make your program sustainable. These are where the elite programs change it for everything else. They go above the regulation. They go above the standard. They take best management practices, make them their standard practices. That's what they do, and that's what they understand in the process. So manage these processes, understand what's going on, and really level with your programs to make them that much better in the process. So in conclusion, elite programs are necessary for success. You really need to take on this workload. It might be really, really high, but keeping this workload, doesn't always require a humongous amount of staff. There's a lot of organization that can be done that can make sure that you stay up to date, understanding, and then also reach out for help. There's always help out there. There might be a lot of training to worry about, keeping staff up to date, or the workload that your industry doesn't require internal staff 24/7 working on emergency response, because you have 2 wet chemistry labs, you have a small manufacturing procedure, and you might not need a full response team kept up with their OSHA 48 level B requirements, making sure everything is up to date. These are things that you can definitely reach out and add help from companies like us to make sure that we can help in these processes to save time, money, and keep you safe. Remember, documentation might be complex for a small staff because of a budget or just because of a small staff in general. Reach out, help. There's always things out there. It's not your main focus. I know there's a small percentage that's on the phone that this is not your main focus, and I understand that. These are the times to be able to reach out and ask for help in the specific areas that you need. Companies like ours will specialize programs to help you, to make you look that much better and to make you get these programs that you want, no matter the size of the company. Might be small, might be large, it does not matter. We've got to be able to help. And then bottom line, consider that external support for the added value of success. I know there is a majority of really good people out there that have high educations, that know what they're doing and understand these processes, which is great and it's awesome, and I respect it to no end. However, add the expertise when you need it. Add that little extra help when you need it. Add that little, ooh, I'm not quite sure, I need someone to just bounce some ideas off of. Use it. Rely on the experts. Rely on people like us to be able to understand it. Get the qualified people in there. Know who's running it, how they're running it, what they're doing. Take that holistic approach of the bigger picture of the program, understanding who's there, how they're doing it, and then the process behind it. Managing the process is key. If you can manage the process, set it up, consistently review it, consistently run it, you're going to get an elite program. You're going to need some help, but it's all going to come in when you really take the efforts in the right direction to really push it and make sure that the qualified people are helping you out. So with that, thank you very much. You can definitely click on the link that we have here. It's going to be sent out following the presentation into making sure that you can get a free on-site services strategy session. This is a good walk around of the facility to help you out. Ask those questions that you want to ask. Be able to bounce ideas off each other. My contact information is here as well. And with that, I thank you all for listening, and I'll turn it back over to James.
All right. Thank you, Mike. And we do have a few minutes for questions, so let's get those in. And as you're doing that, I'll just spend a minute here talking about follow-up and what you can expect in the next day or so. So get the questions in. For those that signed on a little bit late, I just want to restate that you will be getting the presentation that Mike presented today, as well as a recording of today's webinar in an email tomorrow. In addition, you'll receive a link to a short survey. We'd love to hear what you thought. Give us your feedback. Let us know any ideas you have for improvement or future topics. We're doing a few of these a month, so we're always open to hearing some new ideas. As Mike mentioned, there is a link below for a free on-site support services strategy session, and I'm going to send that over in the chat box because I don't think that's clickable. And if you're interested in learning more about that, just check out the link and fill out a short form, and we'll get you in touch with the right person to kind of troubleshoot and discuss your program and opportunities for improvement. And Mike's email. So in case we don't get to all of your questions, you think of something later on, feel free to reach out to Mike. So let's get to the couple of questions that we have. Mike, to start, you talked a little bit about equipment, and I have a question specific to fire extinguishers from Sarah. She wants to know if you're aware of the recommendation for training employees to use them. What are the best practices there?
A lot of the best practices that we've run into is that you should be able to train specific employees to it. You don't want to train every employee to it, and you don't want that to be their first reaction to it. I've had several conversations and several trainings with consultants on this, with our consulting group, that you don't want to train your people to be firefighters. You want your people to be able to know how to use fire extinguishers, how to get somebody out of an emergency situation, make sure that they follow the methods between pass and getting people out as quickly as possible, shutting doors, following good procedures. But to train them to be like firefighters, had many conversations with the consultants, but I also had a conversation with the fire chief once, and he was happy, but on the same sense, he was like, I really wish people wouldn't think that the fire extinguisher is going to put out the entire fire. They have to have a better understanding of it, and this is really where you can really look into making sure that they understand when to use it and get out as quickly as possible and report it, pull the fire alarm, etc., like that.
Thanks, Mike. So we covered a lot of material today, and for someone who's listening in and might have an average or slightly above average program when looking at some of the criteria you presented, what would you recommend as far as, you know, those areas that are often overlooked that could provide opportunities for quick wins? Where do you think someone should get started?
A lot of what I've seen for quick wins are your SOPs, look at your processes, and understanding of what you already know. Look at documentation, look at everything from your permits to your licenses to simple stuff as manifests and understanding, oh, did I get all the materials off-site? Is it organized? Do I know what's going on? Then look up in the processes in the labs or in the industrial setting and see if people understand what to do with certain types of hazardous materials. One of the quickest wins that I saw from a client is that we were walking through a facility one time, and I challenged them. I said, hey, do you mind if I ask a few questions of your employees? And they were like, absolutely. So we started to walk through, and I noticed that as one person was lifting drums up about 3 flights, they were lifting them up on a forklift. They put it down. The client flagged them over, and they were just like, all right, do you have any questions? I said, absolutely. I said, what do you do if a drum were to fall? And they just said, get out of the way. And I go, that's good, but do you have a process in if a drum were to fall, if it were to spill, if there's certain safety procedures that need to be followed for when you're lifting and when you're not? And they kind of looked, and they were just like, well, common sense would dictate. And I go, okay. And then I didn't call it out right there, but then they walked away and continued their work. But then I pulled the client over and I said, do you have a SOP or just process for just safety around moving drums, especially up that high? I can see everybody has hard hats on, but is there a process? And he showed me the process, but it was pretty vanilla. It was very, just be careful, understand that you're going to be moving heavy equipment, heavy drums, and there wasn't a lot around safety. So think about the safety, think about some of the normal processes that you see every day, and see if there's an SOP or there's some kind of process there that you can refine, retain, and make sure that the right people are trained to it as well.
Great advice, and we've got about a minute left. So as we close, can you talk to us a little bit about on-site support services? What does that typically look like? Is it a consultation? Do we have someone on-site on a regular basis? If so, how many people does it take? Just kind of give us a quick overview of what that could look like for a certain facility.
So a lot of the on-site services that Triumvirate provides and that we really hold ourselves to a high standard is that we train and we keep our staff up to date consistently on all the regulations, on all the standards, to make sure that they can provide professional services to any industry that's out there. Depending on the size of the client and the industry, it could be one person for a couple hours a day to 14 people weekly, 5 days a week, 24 hours a day practically, where we really can be that extension of your office, of your department, and helping get things done, understanding what makes these programs that much better, adding value towards inspections or towards regulations and understanding of the regulations, being that person who can bounce ideas back and forth off of each other. That one person or many people on site are just physical bodies, whereas our company offers a much broader scale research and consulting firm that we can actually help and understand and push forward more information consistently that's up to date and also warranted on every problem that persists as well. So on-site support is something that is customized, that is understood, where it needs a walkthrough. You got to understand what the good, the bad, the ugly of what everything looks like, and then be able to customize a program to it. We're going to be able to do everything from moving waste from storage areas or from satellite areas to storage areas, to helping with some of your permit rewrites and understanding that process as well, and taking care of shipments and monitoring and organizing documentation as well. So there's a real big plethora and customized process where we can really push forward the qualified personnel to make sure we can take care of the problems that are out there and take that holistic approach, but also hit on every specific approach that you would want us to as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for attending. That concludes today's webinar. And before I sign off, Mike, if you have anything else to add, feel free. Otherwise, we hope to see you on a future webinar. Keep an eye out for that, and look for the email tomorrow morning.
Excellent. Thank you, James. Thank you, everybody who was listening in and watching. Hopefully we answered a bunch of questions, but we also added value to giving you more ideas around elite programs, above average programs, making sure that you can take next steps into achieving that process, or if you have, this is a good time to refine it just that much more and be able to think a little bit differently towards sustainability and the proactive push that we're all looking for now as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate the time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day. Take care.